In 2019, YouTube was caught violating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Since settling, YouTube has enacted new policies that are meant to serve as a smokescreen so they can dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. As such, for my own protection, it is my obligation to advise you that this video is not aimed at children. My target audience is not children. Parental discretion is advised. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Today we are beginning our look at Dark Shadows, the Quentin Collins Collection. Another digital bundle from Big Finish consisting of 8 of their single releases. The Quentin Collins Collection begins with The Skinwalkers, released in November of 2008, written by Scott Hancock, directed by Darren Gross. The Skinwalkers stars David Selby as Quentin Collins and Laura Parker as Angelique Bouchard. Side note, I just learned I've been saying her name wrong this entire time, because I've only ever seen it written. I thought it was Lara, but now watching interviews and watching people talk to her and so on, no, it's Laura. Anyway, as always, I will be discussing spoilers, so in the description box below is the link to Big Finish's website where you can buy the Quentin Collins Collection digital bundle, or you can buy the Skinwalkers on its own. And the Skinwalkers is very interesting because I like the story itself. The story is really good. I have issues with the production, and I'll get into that as we go on. So the story opens in Collinwood, sitting alone. Quentin is feeling introspective. He begins to reminisce. And in his reminiscing, he inadvertently summons Angelique to his side. And right off the bat, the chemistry between David Selby and Laura Parker is really good. Actually, I'm going to say this. David Selby's chemistry with everyone in this set is really good. But it's a talking point, so I'm going to say it every time. Anyway, as they're talking, Quentin begins talking about his immortality. And, Angelique questions, sort of what happened to him. Because Quentin makes this claim that the man he used to be, he no longer is anymore. And he kind of goes into this story about really what was a turning point for him. And first of all, when it comes to Quentin, I love stories like this. Unlike Barnabas, who has been locked in a crypt for all these centuries, Quentin, who is also immortal, has gotten to walk the earth. So some of my favorite stories from the Dark Shadows range are stories about Quentin's time just, living, prior to the present day. And that's what most of the stories in this set are. I think close to the last I'm gonna say I think 3 of them are not, but that rather than it being clearly set in the present day, it's more walking a fine line. It's kind of in a foggy gray area. Not important. Anyway, as I mentioned, Quentin is sort of tells about this event in his life in the end of the 17th century, I want to say. I think it was around just right before 1900, about this encounter he had with the titular Skinwalkers and how what happened to him when he was living in New York at the time changed his life forever. He lost the man he once was. And I'll just say it right here. David Selby is mostly great. He's a good narrator. He has a very dynamic, engaging voice. His narration here is not the greatest, though. Like a lot of it feels really rushed. He's going a mile a minute, and not in a good way. Like one thing when you're reading an audiobook that the reader will do is they will start speeding up to show tension, to show drama, action. And there is a little bit of that in this story here, but most of the time, a lot of the time, not most of the time, it's in scenes where where it doesn't need that rising tension. It doesn't need to be that dramatic. And like I said, the effect comes off as feeling very rushed. So as I mentioned, Quentin is in New York in the turn of the 19th century, and he has an encounter with this group called the Brotherhood, which sort of this cult that goes to fighting the supernatural. And this particular sect calls themselves the Skinwalkers. And the reasons for this, it's sort of brought up later in the story. So if I remember, I'll bring it up again. And one night, the Skinwalkers capture Quentin because Quentin is a werewolf, but he has managed to contain his curse. But so the Brotherhood, wanting to know how, try to torture it out of him. And like I said, this is also the weakness of the rushed narration that I mentioned, because you get a little bit of it, and David Selby in this scene gives a chilling performance, but it feels very ghosted over because as soon as it happens, it shifts to another part of the story. Because along with this, Angelique finds a diary from a woman named Caitlin. And Quentin's encounter with the Skinwalkers and his relationship with this woman, Caitlin, are tied together. And real quick, I'll say all but one story in this set are about Quentin's relationships with women. Now, and again, this is where the production kind of lets this story down a little bit, because the dramatized readings feature two people generally. Towards the later half of the range, they do start shifting into a full cast format, like they did when I reviewed the horror collection. But initially starting off, they were done by two people. The closest comparison would be the Companion Chronicles from the Doctor Who stuff. The companion in question and a guest of some sort, and the guest would play a character in this story, as well as being someone the main narrator is talking to. And the Skinwalkers doesn't quite do that. Like, every so often, Angelique interjects and talks to Quentin and engages him, and like I said, the chemistry between Selby and Parker is great, but that's it. Like, the story really, well, not really, the story underutilizes Laura Parker. Like, what I would have done, and I hate using this argument because it feels like fan entitlement, and that's not a fair critique, but what I would have done is, as well as being Angelique and interjecting and interacting with Quentin as he tells the story, I would also have had Parker play Caitlin in the story. But like I said, as it is right now, Parker just feels underutilized. Anyway, although what does save this story is really its ending. The ending is spectacular. And part of me doesn't want to give the twists away because there's quite a few. So, what happens is Quentin eventually begins a romantic relationship with Caitlin. Sorry, I blanked on her name for a second. And he finds out she has two children, a son and a daughter. And they are werewolves. And Quentin eventually learns that the Brotherhood, the Skinwalkers, is looking to, obtain them to cure them. Sorry, I have to remember that when I edit this, I'm going to put the cover in the corner here. So I have to remember that whenever I do things with my hands, I cannot put it where the cover is going to be, because then you won't see what I'm doing. But Quentin moves in with Caitlin, and he protects the children. One night, when he's called away on a business meeting, the children are abducted, and then Quentin tries to go and save them. And that's where we start getting the really big revelations about this story. And if you haven't heard it, I suggest stopping the review now and getting it, because I'm going to talk spoilers, because the third act is the best part of this story. So the Skinwalkers themselves are werewolves, and they want to cure the werewolf curse. And if they can't, they want to extinguish it. And the leader of the Skinwalkers, a man named Lowell, is actually Caitlin's ex-husband, and he is the children's father. And what they are trying, and Quentin realizes that he was set up, and he was lured out to meet the Skinwalkers, because the Skinwalkers can't do anything to Quentin. There's this prophecy that he will come to them of his own volition, and he runs back to Caitlin's in time to see the house where they were living burning down, and he watches as the children die. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting their names, but they're never really shown interacting with Quentin. They don't really have any dialogue. He just mentions them, introduces them, and then talks about them a little bit. They don't really play a they aren't really given any personality beyond existing for the sake of the plot. And then, we cut back to the end. Caitlin's body was never found from the fire. And we kind of get this other revelation that, because Caitlin later sent Quentin a letter, Caitlin herself is a werewolf. But whereas Quentin sees the werewolf curse as a hindrance, even though his portrait no longer allows him to. Whereas Quentin sees the werewolf curse as a hindrance, and the portrait prevents him from turning, and the Brotherhood wants to cure werewolves, Caitlin isn't like that. She loves the freedom of the curse. So she orchestrated her children's demise to be free, essentially. And it's something that devastated Quentin. He essentially lost who he was. When this happened, it destroyed him, basically. He turned off his heart and plunged himself into a life of hedonism and, reckless pursuits and reckless passion. And, in the past when I talked about Quentin, I've said, imagine if Dorian Gray was a werewolf. And that really kind of sets Quentin on this path. And that's when we get the really big twist at the end, but with Quentin and Angelique. They were never there. This entire time, it wasn't them. It was Quentin's portrait. Quentin's portrait was reminiscing. He says that he feels so sorry for Quentin, who is still out in the world, living the way he is, because all the grief and the pain and the trauma Quentin experienced, the portrait feels. And similarly, Angelique was never there. She was a figment of a memory that the portrait summoned to keep him company. The Skinwalkers is good. It's not great or anything. Like I said, it's got a great story and a phenomenal third act. But unfortunately, the production and the direction kind of lets it down a little bit. So I'm going to give The Skinwalkers a 6 out of 10, above average. And join me next week when we will look at another interaction, when we will look at another time in Quentin's life. We'll be going to the era of Prohibition in Blood Dance. Those are my thoughts on The Skinwalkers, the start of the Quentin Collins Collection. Have you heard it? What are yours? Remember to like, or start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. In the description box below, you'll find the link to my Twitter where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and I'll see you guys next time.